Hi everyone, welcome to On the Other Hand. I'm Ariane Zurcher, and today I'm going to be demonstrating the backstitch. I'm going to show you how to stitch it so that it doesn't bunch up your fabric, which is, I think, a pretty common thing that can happen with the backstitch. I'll show the backstitch done in a couple of different threads, and I'll show it both left-handed and right-handed. If you haven't done so already, subscribe. Click on the thumbs up button to help me out with the YouTube algorithms. And I love hearing from you. Leave me comments in the comments section. Grab something to stitch with, grab a needle and some thread, and let's stitch the backstitch. This fabric is a hand-dyed, hand-painted linen that my friend Pat Pauley sent to me. She, if you are not familiar with Pat's work, I'm going to put her website link in the description. She is an amazing artist, but she also teaches, and she's a wonderful teacher, and she teaches how to do this. She typically does it on cotton, but she knows that I work with linen, so she sent me some linen, and it's just amazing. Okay, so I'm going to use this as my this is a wool circle that I've whip stitched down. If you don't know how to whip stitch, I did a video on it. I'm going to put it in the upper right corner of this video, and you can click on that for how to whip stitch. And I'll also put a link for those of you who are new to this kind of stitching, beginning a thread, threading a needle, and doing a quilter's knot. I'll do that. I'll put that video also up in the corner. So here's my little wool circle that I've whip stitched down, and I'm going to use this thread. It's a painter's cotton, soft cotton thread. There's a couple of places that carry this. It's a wonderful thread, German company, but there are a few places in the United States. I can't remember the name of it, but I'll put the link below as well. So I just thought that was a nice thread to kind of go blend, and I'm going to do my back stitch using it. It's a pretty heavy weight. It's a 3-weight thread, but I think it'll look nice around the edge as a back stitch. So I'm going to cut off a length. I'm going to go ahead and thread up an 18 chenille needle. I'm going to do my little quilter's knot. And I'm going to come in through the back here. I'm going to go right on the edge of this circle, of this whip stitched wool circle. So I'm not going in, I'm just going to the very edge of it. So I'm actually doing the back stitch around the linen, but edging this. And it's just going to create a little emphasis for this shape. It also, the back stitch is a great, you'll find that it's, as you stitch more, it's a great foundation stitch, where it's a stitch like, if you're going to do a Pekingese stitch, you're going to need to do a back stitch. Or if you're doing a trellis stitch, you'll need to lay down a back stitch. Open buttonhole filler stitch, you're going to need to have a back stitch. So the back stitch is nice on its own, but it's also a stitch that is used often with other, in conjunction with other stitches. So what I do is I come up, this is for left-handed, I'm holding the needle and thread in my left hand. I come up, I'm going to be working clockwise. I'm going to go back, which hence the name, the back stitch, and then I'm going to come forward about the same distance. So what I do, this is just a general way, I put the thread down, and where this thread is coming out, it should be about the same from here to this thread and from here to this thread. We want them to be equal. Now, I'm not going to get out a ruler and measure or anything like that, and if it goes off and I'm not paying attention, or I'm whatever, something happens and one of the stitches is going to be bigger or smaller, that's okay. It's all fine. I'm not going for perfection. I'm going for good enough. Good enough is really fine. So, like, okay, so perfect example. Right now, this from here to here is much smaller than from here to here. That's okay. I'm not going to take it out. I'm just going to keep going. Now, what I want to say about the backstitch. I'm assuming that if you're watching this video, you either have had some trouble with the backstitch or you're just starting out and learning how to do these stitches and you're new to all of this. Either way, one of the most important things about the backstitch is if I'm not careful with my tension, I'm going to pull this whole thing in. And you'll be able to see that it's getting pulled in because when you turn it over to the back, you're going to see this circle and you're going to have created a little crater. And that'll tell you that you've pulled your backstitch in too tightly. So the key to the backstitch is to keep this stitch fairly relaxed. So do you see how it's sort of bubbled up here? There's quite a bit of, it's pretty lax. I don't want it tight. I want to make sure that when I come up for my next stitch, I'm not pulling it. I want to keep it, I don't want it floppy, you know, and I'm not going for floppy, but I'm definitely aware of the tension so that it doesn't pull. So what you're going to see is that this should lay totally flat around the edge without pulling the fabric in at all. And the reason I don't want it to pull in is because A, it's going to distort my fabric. I mean, imagine if you had dozens of circles, you know, after a while, it will make a difference. But the other is that if I'm using this back stitch for something else, if it's a really tightly stitched back stitch, it's going to be hard to get my needle under there to weave something in, or if maybe I want to do a double threaded back stitch, which I did a video on, and I'll put that video up in the upper right corner as well. So you can see that's a really lovely stitch, the double threaded or the single threaded, which is just called the threaded back stitch. There are variations. There's also the whipped back stitch. So I'm just going to go around making sure that I'm not pulling my needle in so that the thread, so that I have lots of leeway here and I'm not distorting the shape or pulling it in so that I create that crater in the background. And what you'll see when I've finished going around, I'll flip it over and show you the back, and you should see that it doesn't create a little divot. It should just lay flat. And if it does create a divot, it's because I've pulled it too tight. Now, if you run out of thread, okay, so let's say I've run out of thread, my thread is really short and I don't have enough to finish, then I just pull my thread into the back here. I make a knot on the back. I weave it behind in between this linen layer and the wool so that it's hidden, and I clip it off, start a new thread with a knot, bring the knot right up here, and come in one length ahead of where I've ended, right? Because I want to go back. I always want to go back. I don't want to start and then go here because it's going to change the way the stitch lays. So I keep going around as I have been. Now, I'm doing a circle, so I need it to end at the place where it began. And that means that inevitably one of these stitches is going to be bigger or much smaller than the others. Every now and then I get it and it's just sort of perfect, but typically I just kind of have to fudge it a little bit. So I'm going to do that. I could do one really long one, sort of divide this space in half and figure, which maybe I'll do. So if I do that, this is kind of the halfway mark right there. So I'm going to go in here. I'm going to come up here. Go down, come up where I began, which is right here. And anchor my thread down. And then we're going to have a look at the back. So this stitch is a bit longer than the others. That's okay. For the most part, I think it's fine. I'm going to turn it over, and how does it look? It's laying flat. This is a thick thread, so it is standing up, but it isn't pulling this in. I'm going to show you an example of where it has been pulled in so that you can see what that looks like. Do you see how it's creating this kind of crater in here? Just a little. It's not terrible. There's nothing, I can probably steam it out. But when you look, that back stitch is a little bit too tight. It should have been a bit looser. I can probably steam this and it'll be fine. It's not enough to really create a problem, but that is what I'm looking for, as opposed to this, where it's just laying flat. And you can see that it's laying flat. There's nothing getting pulled in. So that's an example, and that's what I'm trying to avoid. All right, so I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to tie my knot at the back here, and I'm going to slip my needle in between this linen and the wool so that it doesn't show on the wool and it doesn't show on the linen. And I'm just going to pull my thread through, and I'm going to clip it, and my thread is then hidden in between those two layers. And there it is. I'm going to go ahead and show you this, the back stitch done with my right hand, for those of you who are right-handed. I'm going to use a silk thread. This is Steph Francis. I absolutely adore their threads. I'll put the link down below in the description section. This is their silk texture selection. And what they do is they do the same dye lot, the same variegation on 5 different silk threads. So you get a variety. And if you're not familiar with the various threads, it's really a great way to try out some threads that you might otherwise not purchase on their own. But once I like something, I make a note of the color, which is 28, and that it's the silk. This one is the one that I'm going to use. It's a 3-weight silk pearl, I believe. And I'm going to isolate that and cut off a piece of it. And this is going to be this is what I'm going to be using to stitch around this circle. For those of you who are right-handed, it's really the same concept. However, I'm going to be going counterclockwise instead of clockwise. Again, I'm going to come up right on the edge of where the wool is whip stitched down into the linen. So I'm actually not coming up through the wool at all. I'm just coming right up to the edge of it. I'm going to pull my thread through, and I'm going to go back down, going back, and then coming up the same distance away. So if I put my thread here, I'm going back this way and coming up the same distance from here to here, from here to here. It should be equidistant or close. Again, it's not the end of the world if it's not exact, but that's what I'm going for. And I'm going to pull my thread through, and I'm going to make sure that I'm not pulling it so tightly that I'm bunching it up. I go back down, and again, I come out the other side And I'm going to keep going all the way around this wool circle. If I am if I'm wondering if I'm getting it right, then I can pull my thread down like this, and I can see that my needle is much closer here than over here. So I'm going to adjust and pull that through. And that is the back stitch. I'm going to go ahead and show you a couple of examples of the back stitch done in different threads so that you just get an idea of what it can look like using a lot of different threads. Remember this one? I showed you how it was pulled a little too tightly, and so it's kind of creating this crater effect. This is done in a silken pearl. It's the Thread Gather Silk Pearl number 5. And it's a beautiful thread. That's what this is. And it creates a really lovely back stitch. This is a trellis stitch, and it's done in a Steph Francis, I believe this is a 5-weight. And the trellis stitch begins with a back stitch all the way around, and then you create this beautiful spiral. But you have to do a back stitch in order to do a trellis stitch. This is a double-threaded back stitch, and I've put the video for that in the upper right corner previously. And this is done with an Aurora thread. This is the Thread Gatherer. It's called Aurora, and it's got a little tiny little metallic thread running through it. It's really lovely. It looks like this. This is the Aurora. And so I did the back stitch in the Aurora, and then I did a very loopy double-threaded with a Steph Francis, I believe it's a 5-weight. Here I did a back stitch in a 4mm silk ribbon. And this is a back stitch done in a variegated, and then I did a double-threaded with a viscose ribbon. So there are all different ways in which you can do the back stitch. This is the open buttonhole filler stitch. And again, like the trellis, you have to lay down a back stitch around the outer edge in which to then weave and get this other stitch, which is really pretty. This is done in an Oriental linen. It's another of the thread gatherers. I love the Oriental linen. So those are a couple of different ways in which the back stitch is used as a base, and also, as you saw me demonstrate, just doing the back stitch by itself. There are a lot of applications for the back stitch. I hope you found this helpful. Don't forget to give me a thumbs up. It helps me with YouTube and placement in the search engine. Subscribe if you haven't already. And until next time, let's keep stitching together.